welcome back to this week's episode of Outside the Arena. I'm Griffin Senek, joined alongside my co-host Devin Bernstein, and a bit of a different episode this week. We're recording this one as Sunday Night Football is currently going on, so we don't have predictions for you today, unfortunately. We're going to be kind of discussing and breaking down week 12, I guess it is now, of the NFL season, the results. But we have to first start off with some college football today. Huge weekend. Rivalry weekend in college football, and we saw some incredible games. Obviously, we're going to touch on the game, Ohio State, Michigan, to kick things off, but also just some other good games. Washington State was really good. Alabama, Auburn was a classic. So a lot of really good competitive games. But like I said, we're going to start things off today with not Alabama, Michigan, Ohio State versus Michigan. Michigan, for the third year in a row, wins this one 30-24. Super close game. Kyle McCord throws an interception with less than a minute left on the clock, I believe. Blake Corum for Michigan had 2 touchdowns. Maserati Marv had a good game for the Buckeyes. A really close one, but now it's kind of got everyone thinking, is Ryan Day going to get fired? He's now 1-6 against top 5 opponents, has lost to Michigan 3 years in a row. Your thoughts on the game? And then obviously, I feel like the biggest kind of storyline that has now come out of the game has probably been relating to Ryan Day. So any thoughts on that too?
Yeah, I mean, starting off with the Ryan Day thing quickly, I don't think he should be fired. I get it, I do, but I just think he's too soon into his tenure to really judge whether it's just happened that he's lost a few close games to top 5 teams, or if he's not a great coach. And I guess it's possible that he's not a great coach, but like the Georgia game last year, I don't think there's much he could have done. I mean, even the game this year, I felt like they were a little bit worse at quarterback, and that was the main difference. I don't think McCord is bad, but he's not really even a very good college quarterback at this point. It feels like whenever anything goes wrong, he's just kind of screwed. Whereas a lot of these college quarterbacks are athletic enough to make a lot of plays with their feet and stuff like that. And just doesn't feel like he quite has that. Maybe he can get there. He's still a young guy, but just doesn't feel like he's, in this top tier of quarterbacks. Outside of that, obviously a great game. There were a lot of close calls. It felt like between the touchdown that looked like it could have been an interception, and then there were a few other close calls as well. Outside of that, Corum had a pretty big game. And it's just what an atmosphere. I'm not someone who really has had a stake in this either way. But it's just such a cool game, everyone's storming the field, so it's so you don't even get that in the NFL in a way. There's a certain level of the college football atmosphere that I think the product in the NFL is better, but you don't really get to see that very often, something like that. So what about you?
Yeah, I mean, it was as someone who kind of has rooted for Ohio State for a while, especially the football team, it was a tough one seeing them lose again, especially a third year in a row. Yeah, on the Ryan Day stuff, yeah, I get it, and it's warranted to be concerned because when you're at Ohio State, the standard is, beating Michigan every year and also, beating the best teams in the country. You look at some of those games, obviously, against the top 6 opponents. Michigan the last few years, obviously, nothing they can do there. They've just gotten beat. The Georgia game was super close, obviously. The year before that, they lost to, I think it was maybe 2 years ago, they lost to that, Alabama team that no one was going to beat in the playoff final. So it's just some of these things are not out of his control, but you can't blame him for everything. I do think that there are some times where it feels like he's coaching scared, especially against Michigan, some decisions that I think, whether it's going for it on a 4th down or just the play calling could be a little bit improved. But yeah, I agree. I wouldn't fire him. I think, I think he's got a good hold on that locker room still from what it seems like. It seems like his players love him, play hard for him. And, also you got to look at it as who else would they really hire per se? Obviously they could get pretty much anyone in the country, you would imagine, for the most part. But it's who are you going to hire per se that's out there that's going to make a huge difference unless it's like you bring back an Urban Meyer or something like that, which, I don't know if Urban necessarily would be open to that. I don't really know. And I don't think that's what Ohio State wants to do right now. So, yeah, I don't think Day will be fired. In terms of the game itself, like you talked about it once again, like hit the nail on the head. Like McCord just it's just a level down from what they've had the last few years with Stroud and Fields and Haskins. Like they just haven't had a quarterback like at McCord's level in a little bit. He's just not wasn't good enough. He didn't even have a bad game per se. Obviously, the two interceptions, were big and came at pretty bad times. But like I thought he made some pretty strong throws in this one. Like I didn't think it was a terrible performance from him. I think you saw the Ohio State defense much improved from the last few years. I mean, we've heard about it all year, but their defense, they did a much better job against the run this year. Obviously, in the fourth quarter and it started to unravel a little bit, but it wasn't like the past few years. So they were in the game, man. It was just like you said, there were some close calls. They had the missed field goal. I think that was huge too, because obviously, they were basically in range again at the end. So what are you going to do, though? I mean, Michigan, hats off to them. They've played great 3 years in a row. They were doing it without Harbaugh too. You got to give them all the credit in the world. I mean, they've been going through a lot these last few weeks, and they stepped up and made the plays. So, barring an unforeseen loss to Iowa in the Big Ten championship, they should be ranked in the top two in the playoff once again. Which is, they've Jim Harbaugh has done an incredible job at turning that program around from where it was, 3 years ago when they hadn't beaten Ohio State in how many ever years it was. So hats off to him. And yeah, it should have been, I didn't even realize this, but I know I'm on a rant right now, but if Northwestern had beaten Iowa at the game at Wrigley, they lost by 3 points on a game-winning field goal. They would have been playing Michigan this weekend in the Big
Oh,
Ten championship game,
that's
which is
hilarious.
crazy. It's crazy. So I thought I'd throw that in there, but yeah, credit to Michigan, man. They did it again, and tough time for Ohio State fans, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So we want to get into some general college football playoff talk. I would say like this has probably been one of the most competitive years in terms of the amount
Yeah,
of Power 5 teams that have one loss or less.
yeah,
Obviously just going down the board, Georgia looks like I don't know, are they I guess they're obviously in with a win, but like
yeah.
with a loss, then it gets complicated because then you probably let Bama in over them. You probably let Texas in over them. You probably let Michigan over them. And then it's like Washington or a Florida State or, two of those three teams are going
It's
to be getting left
crazy.
out. So, I mean, yeah, before getting into all the scenarios like that, I mean, it's just, they're in a really tough matchup, obviously against Bama. That feels like it could go either way. And then Michigan, they're probably going to run over Iowa would be my guess, but I just, I just don't think Iowa has the offense to even compete with Michigan, even if they can hold them to like 28 or 21 points, something like that. Um, but then it starts to get really interesting where you got Washington against Oregon. I believe Oregon is like 7.5 point favorites for this game, which is
Really?
crazy to me. Um,
I
so
guess
that's
Washington's played in some close games recently, though.
yeah.
So I
So
guess that's where that's coming from.
yeah. So I don't really get that, but I'll take Vegas's word for that. Just thought I'd throw that in there. But that's obviously a super important matchup where it looks like the winner's going to get in, but there's so many teams that it's possible that somehow like an Oregon maybe would get left out if they win. Um, and then it's like Texas is probably on the outside looking in, but they beat Bama. So if Bama beats Georgia, then it gets really weird. Um, and then there's of course the Florida State thing, and they're number 5 right now. And if they go undefeated and beat Louisville next week, like I think they will, despite the Travis injury, which is obviously another thing that the committee is like not supposed to take into account. But then it's like, how do you not in a way?
Yeah.
Um, so there are a lot of really like I think we just named 7 or 8 teams that all have a chance here.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I don't really know what happens. My guess is Michigan wins, Georgia. I don't know. I think Georgia and Bama are really evenly matched. It just feels like Bama is playing their best football right now. I'll lean towards Georgia in that game. I still think Washington might have the edge on Oregon, but again, that could go either way. And then I guess Florida State is probably the weakest team of all of these, but like I said, they haven't lost yet. So it's almost
Yep.
impossible to leave them out, assuming they win against Louisville, who just lost to a 6-5 Kentucky team. So I'm not super confident in Louisville either. So I guess what it ends up looking like is maybe, well, what are the rankings now, right? This week
Well, the
it's
AP poll just dropped, and right now it's, I know that's not what it is, but just
yeah,
to get a hint of what it could be. Right now,
yeah,
the AP poll is Georgia, Michigan, Washington, Florida State, Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, Bama.
interesting.
Yes.
Okay. So it seems like Washington or Oregon, the winner of that would definitely be in. Seems like Michigan and Georgia will be in definitely with the win, and then Florida State as well. Um, so that's just how it seems right now. But then it's also, I guess, the one thing that does complicate things the most is if Bama wins, because that's almost
Yeah.
like a twofer in a way, because Bama then leaps in. Georgia is still a question mark because I think everyone in their heart of hearts does think they're a top 4 team in the country. Um, and then you have Texas who beat Bama. So that gets even more complicated. So I keep coming back to that, but that does seem like the one thing that could really cause complete chaos here. And then they still have Ohio State at 6. My guess would be the committee has them a little bit lower, but even then, it's like it's still possible with a few of these losses that Ohio
Yeah.
State maybe sneaks in here. So there's a lot to go over. Yeah, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I think this year is by far the best we've seen with the college football playoff. Like it is, I think they've got a shot to get two really good games on the schedule, which I mean they did last year was probably the best we've seen. Obviously the the final sucked, but
Yeah,
the two games before were some of the best games of the year in college football. So um I think like you said, Georgia with a win is obviously in, Michigan with the win is obviously in. Georgia with a loss is still probably in, I would say. Um, Michigan with the loss, though, is probably out, I would say, if they lose to Iowa. Not that I think they're going to. I think they'll probably run through Iowa. Um, I don't think Iowa's going to put up more than like 7 points a game. Um, so, yeah, I think Georgia and Michigan, I'm going to say Georgia wins. So, Georgia and Michigan get in. I think the winner of Washington, Oregon has to get in, no matter who it is. And the loser has to be out, I think. So I think right there, then I'm going to say Georgia gets in either way, and Michigan will win. So then I think Georgia, Michigan, and then the winner of Oregon, Washington. That's 3 spots, and then the last spot I think is where it gets really interesting. You got Florida State playing Louisville. If they win, I feel like you have to put them in, but it's tough because it's like you look at all these good teams that are in the rankings right now, and it's like, do you really want to put in a Florida State team without Jordan Travis that's like probably gonna get killed? Not maybe not killed, but like they probably don't really have a realistic shot to if they're like number 4 playing like Georgia. Like I don't really like. I think there's better games out there. Texas, I think, is kind of screwed no matter what. I don't really feel like they can leapfrog all the way to 4 unless because if Bama wins, then Bama's getting in over Texas just because they beat Georgia, and I still think Georgia gets in over Texas. So then there's no path for them there. And then if Bama loses, Georgia, Michigan are probably in the winner, and then like would they leapfrog Florida State and the Ohio State is super interesting, man, because it's like I think last year they had a much clearer path to getting in than this year. But at the same time, it's like they lost by 6 points to what's going to be probably the number 2 ranked team in the country. Um, they went undefeated otherwise. They beat Penn State, they beat Notre Dame. Obviously, I think them not playing this weekend is probably the biggest disadvantage just because like if you look at like Texas, like if they beat Oklahoma State this weekend who's ranked 19, like they should probably leapfrog Ohio State. But it's interesting for sure. I think Ohio State, to me, the only way they get in is if Florida State and Texas lose and Georgia wins. I think I think they're in actually. If Texas loses, if Bama loses, and if Florida State loses, I think Ohio State has to be in. I think that's their only path though. I would say, which is pretty rough, but I guess it could happen, but I think it'll be interesting for sure. I think this week's rankings will be very indicative of where things stand also. Because obviously, like, let's say Ohio State moves to like 7 or 8 or something like that. Like, then it's like, all right, I think they would have to be ranked like 6 probably to have a shot. I don't know. I'm kind of rambling. It's going to be fascinating to see. We'll definitely talk about it next week on the podcast, I would assume, we'll have to figure out when, because the selection show would be Sunday, December 3rd, then, right?
Correct.
So we'll either be, I don't know when we're going to film the next podcast, but we'll either be talking about the college football playoff or predicting it once again. So I don't know. Do you have any final thoughts? I mean, it's truly fascinating what's going to happen, and I hope that there's some I think no matter what happens, there's going to be like a question mark. I think 100%. Like, assuming Michigan takes care of business, I think then there's 3 teams that are locked in no matter what. I would say would be Georgia, Michigan, and then winner of Oregon, Washington.
Yeah, that's how that seems like most likely, but it feels like there are a lot of things that could definitely happen here.
Yeah,
My only last final thought is just like the playoff is expanding to 12 teams next year. And like
yeah,
we're not necessarily going to get these types of competitive races between the top tier teams in the country. But at the same time, we are going to be able to see more of these matchups between the top teams. So I don't even know. I think we have to see the 12-team playoff before we can really think about, which one is
yeah,
better, stuff like that. But I'm just interested because this is one of the last chances we're going to get in like this older version of college football before, all the conference changes coming soon. And then obviously the 12-team expansion, where it feels like it'll just be, I guess, like this year, it would be just like maybe like Penn State fighting for a spot. But, that's not really a team that's like playing in a conference championship necessarily. So that's going to be interesting. But I'm excited to see how this year plays out and then how the future years play out. Part of me does wish we got a 12-team playoff this year just because it
yeah,
does feel like there's like 8 teams that's like, well, they could maybe win a national championship this year. Like
yeah.
it very rarely does feel like that in college football. So certainly, something to be said about maybe the transfer portal helping, some parity and stuff like that. Don't want to go on for too long about college football, but um yeah, I'm super excited to see how this weekend plays out, like I said.
Yeah, the 12 team this year would be, I think, awesome because, like you said, like this is the most like top heavy we've really seen, like where there's like you said, like 8 legitimate, like, or 7, 8, 9, 10. I mean, there's a lot of good teams. Like, even like, LSU, obviously they've had some losses. They're ranked 13, but like that'd still be a fun team. They're an SEC team, like with Jaden Daniels, like they could go out and beat almost anyone in the country probably, on any given day. So it does suck that we don't have the 12 team this year. Because I think next year, it's probably unlikely that we'll have this good. But who knows? I mean, the conference realignment next year is going to make things so much more interesting. Um, it sucks, dude. The Pac-12, especially, like the Pac-12 was literally like the best conference in the country this year, and it's just totally
Yeah.
disbanding. It's crazy, but hey, that's college football these days. So yeah, like we said, whenever we film the next episode, we'll break down the latest in the college football scene. It's going to be fascinating to see how it all unfolds for sure. Hopefully, it just turns into pure chaos. But with that, we're going to move on to the NFL, where basically all the games are through at this point. The Chargers right now up 3-0 on the Ravens. Bears Vikings square off tomorrow. But we're going to kick things off. We're going to talk about kind of the main games. We're not going to touch on some of these kind of lower level matchups, but we'll start things out. Packers Lions. This was a great game on Thanksgiving, and Jordan Love, man, he's silencing some doubters. He's started to play a lot better. threw for 268 yards, 3 passing touchdowns in this one. The Lions, bit of a mess, just didn't really get things going until it was too late. You know, I guess for both teams, like the Packers, obviously 5-6 now, they're right there in the playoff hunt. Do you think this team, from what you've seen the last few weeks, can make a run in the playoffs? And then with the Lions, any concerns with this, or just kind of one of those weeks that kind of all teams almost experience in the NFL, it feels like?
Yeah, I'm a little back and forth on the Lions. Like I do think, it's easy to overreact to one game. It's a divisional game on a short week. So you don't want to overreact, but at the same time, like when the Packers are able to move the ball really easily on you, it does scare you a little bit about your defense. Like, how many clear above average starters do they have outside of Hutchinson? That's a good question to ask. And they're mostly solid everywhere else. It feels like they don't have any necessarily weaknesses, but as you get into higher and higher level of football, you just need more studs in a sense. And they're kind of lacking that. Offensively, I'm not super concerned. It was mostly like fumbles and stuff like that. Like, I don't think that's going to persist. Like, even last week against the Bears, it felt a little bit more concerning because it was interceptions, but this week kind of just felt like some fluky turnovers. So I'm not worried about the offense. As for the Packers, like, I don't believe in them still, but I'll say I think Jordan Love has at least earned himself one more year. At the very least, like, he hadn't looked good for his first 10 games, so it was hard to defend him, but it did feel like it was a little bit early to necessarily write him off.
Yeah.
So I guess he's kind of, started to right the ship and figure some things out, as has Matt LaFleur offensively. And it just feels like they're making less like stupid plays as an offense where it seems like they're out of sync or whatever, someone messed up the play call, something like that. Which is a good sign. And like you said, they're right in the mix. So I wouldn't be surprised to see them make the playoffs, but I don't see them, they'd probably be in as the 6 or 7 seed going against like the Lions or the Niners or something like that. Like that doesn't sound like an easy matchup, although they did just beat the Lions in Detroit. So anything could happen. But I would not predict the Packers to make the playoffs and or be competitive if they do get there.
Yeah, I think that's fair for sure. I think, they're probably about a 500 level team that, hey, if they squeak in, they're a 7 seed that's, not really great. Maybe they could, squeak something out. I don't know, probably unlikely. But yeah, Jordan Love, I mean, I don't think he's at least showed that he, belongs in the NFL. He's not a Zach Wilson type player. He's he's solid. I mean, he's not great, but he's putting together some, really good back-to-back weeks now. So you got to give him credit. He seems to be a little more comfortable in the offense now. For the Lions, like you said, defensively, it's always kind of been a question mark. Obviously, you know, they've got guys who can make plays. Brian Branch has been good for them all year. You've got, Anzalone, one of the two
Anzalone, yeah.
pronunciations. Anzalone, yeah. He's a, solid veteran linebacker there. Got some guys in the secondary. So yeah, they got guys that can make plays. This is an elite defense, no, and I think we, kind of saw that this week on Thanksgiving. And offensively, I think you hit it out of the park. Jared Goff, although the last few weeks have been a little, worrisome with the turnovers. He still gets the job done most of the time. Pretty solid quarterback. Amon-Ra's great. Jameer and David Montgomery are arguably the best 1-2 punch in football right now at the running back position. So offensively, this team is still elite. Defensively, going to be interesting to see, especially against these, elite teams that they're going to have to come across in the playoffs. Can that defense hold up? Or is the offense going to have to really carry the load? And, can they go, shot for shot with some of these elite offenses that, we've seen, you look in the NFC right now, the Eagles offense is should put up a lot of points today. Dallas has been scoring a ton. The 49ers have got a lot of weapons there. So there's a lot of really good offenses that, can the Lions keep up with? It's going to be interesting to see going forward. But it's kind of all I got for this one. I don't know if you got anything else to add.
No, you want to talk about Niners Seahawks?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, this was a not the most competitive game. I mean, like the Niners came out pretty pissed off. The Seahawks couldn't really stop them to start the game. They couldn't really score. They found themselves in a pretty big hole. They kind of got back in the game with a Brock Purdy pick six, but they just weren't able to build on that momentum. They ended up having a nice drive where they had to settle for three. And I think that cut it to 10, if I'm not wrong, something in that range, and it just would have been huge to get a touchdown there, just feel like you're in the game. um Outside of that, the Niners feel very much like the team that they looked like the first 6 weeks of the year, and the Niners are definitely the type of team that when they lose, they look really bad, and or not really bad, but when they lose, it looks pretty ugly. And when they win, they look like super dominant and unstoppable. And this is one of those weeks where they felt dominant and unstoppable. Like all the weapons were going. Ayuk, kind of got involved later in the game. Kittle is really good, obviously, in the run game and the pass game, so he can make impact and a huge impact outside the box score. McCaffrey's going to do his thing. He had 2 touchdowns, and Deebo Samuel looks like he's getting back healthy and involved in this offense. I think he had 80 receiving yards, and did he have a rushing touchdown as well?
Yeah, he did.
I'm not sure, but yeah. So that's mostly my yeah, he did. Okay.
Yeah,
That's
sorry, I
mostly
think
my
my
thoughts
thing's
on the
lagging.
Niners. On the Seahawks. Oh yeah, no worries. Wait, can you okay, we're
Yeah, I
good?
can hear you. We're good. We're good.
Okay,
Yeah,
sorry.
no, you're good.
Okay, sorry. And then yeah, as for the Seahawks, little concerned about the Geno performance. Like maybe he's a little hurt again, short week against a really good defense. That's obviously going to be tough. But just feels like he's holding on to the ball a little bit too long, or not finding guys, or people aren't quite as open as they were last year. So, a little bit concerned about the Seahawks. And I think we talked about it last week how they have a brutal schedule coming up that started this week. And I think their next 3 games are the Cowboys on Thursday night again, and then the Eagles and the Niners again. So those are 3 really brutal games. They're 6-5 now. So it's just like they could. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they're 6-8 after 3 weeks. So that they're still weirdly in play for a playoff spot, even if they are 6-8. But you really feel like you have to win one of these next 3 games to feel confident in your team. And you kind of look back at that Rams game last week and wonder, man, like we really should have won that one, because it's not going to get any easier right now. So yeah, there, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you put it really well. The Niners seem to be getting back into the swing of things. They had some injuries. You had Devo out for a little bit. CMC was banged up. I think Ayuk maybe missed a game somewhere in there. But now everyone's back, and it's just a smooth offense. I mean, CMC has been such a stud all year. He had another 2 touchdowns, 5 catches. Like this guy's just a stud, and we had been knowing that, but it's great to see him, put a full season these last 2 years on the field when there's a lot of concerns going into, before last season, whether he could stay healthy, and he's answered the bell. Defensively, I mean, this defense is just loaded. Charvarius Ward, I mean, had a great game on DK Metcalf all day. Lockett, DK, and Smith and Jigba only combined for 8 catches. It just can't happen. If the Seahawks are going to win football games, Kenneth Walker out especially, like those guys have got to get involved way more. And obviously a tough matchup. This Niners defense is no joke, but just cannot happen. One of those guys should be having 8 catches every game, not the 3 of them combining for 8 catches. That's how you know it's a nightmare. But yeah, for Seattle, like you said, like they're kind of screwed almost. They got a path to the playoffs. The NFC isn't, super. There's a path to the playoffs at 9-8, or I don't know about 8-9, maybe, but you know, like you said, one of these next 3 games is probably a success. 2, they're going to be in the playoffs. So it's going to be a grind. Gino, like you said, seems like the elbow is still an issue. I mean, he had a short week, which sucked, and it's not even like they get a benefit from the whole week and a half. They get right back on Thursday, so kind of unfortunate for them. But they'll just have to make sure he's good enough to go. Like you said, I think they play Dallas next week. So playing that defense with a hurt elbow is, not, it could be a long day for Seattle. So we'll see how that goes. And like you said, with the Niners, just seems like this team is kind of back into the groove of things. And, you know, 8-3 now, it feels like we were panicking once a while ago about this team. I think they were 5-3 and now they've won 3 in a row, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, they're who we thought that they were. Next week is going to be great with them and Philly going at it. I can't wait for that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just, I'm trying to look at the schedule. I guess we'll go to Black Friday. Talk about the New York Jets. I mean, they suck. We don't have to stick on this game too long. Miami took care of business. I guess there's not even really much to talk about with this one. I mean, Tim Boyle's not the answer. That's kind of all I got to say. Like, I don't, the people who thought that Tim Boyle was going to fix the offense, it's like, you're just not looking at the team the right way. The receivers suck. The O-line sucks. Yeah, it's kind of all I got. Miami, they're it's crazy. They're tied for the best record in the AFC right now, but it feels like they have like no like really good wins against good teams. And like you look at their schedule upcoming, it's Dolphins, Titans, Jets. Then they do have Cowboys, Ravens, Bills. So they got a kind of gauntlet at the end. So it'll be interesting to see how they fare there. But yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that or if you just want to move on to one of the games from today.
Yeah, no, I think you put it well. The Dolphins, it'll be really telling when that 3-game stretch comes up,
Yeah.
like you said.
Yep. All right, well, moving on to today. I'm trying to look through these games. I mean, some of these games, Bucks Colts was a pretty good game. JT 2 touchdowns, Mike Evans 2 touchdowns. Giants Patriots, not so good of a game. Man, the Patriots they're going to end up with Caleb Williams though. I'm convinced now, and it's just going
Yep.
to be torture for the next gazillion years again. Um, that would be unreal if they end up with Caleb Williams, and it's totally going to happen. I don't know if the Panthers can win another game though. They're so bad.
Yeah.
Um, Steelers took care of business against Jake Browning and the Bengals. What are your thoughts? I mean, obviously they fire Matt Canada this week. The offense seems to kind of come alive. So, um, you know, obviously I feel like a lot of people have dogged on the Steelers just because of that offense and how bad it's been. So from what you saw this week, obviously Cincinnati, without Joe Burrow, not really competitive in the most part. But, do you think there's maybe more upside or more, potential for the Steelers team to kind of make a run? Obviously, it seems like they're trending towards making the playoffs, but has your outlook changed at all after what you saw today from the Steelers offense?
Yes and no. When you first asked me that question, I was all excited to give you a yes and say that this team can contend, but you look at it this way and what they did was they were able to get Freiermuth much more involved. He had, I think, like 120 yards or something like that. Like he had a
Yeah.
huge day, which is obviously a great step for the offense. Najee had an 100 yards day, which is obviously huge for them. Warren was running the ball well. Pickens had a big catch. Johnson doing his thing at times. I saw there was like a weird play where he like didn't try for a fumble, which was a little weird, but besides that, everything seemed good and their record is good. They're probably going to make the playoffs. But then I was thinking about it. It's like they're probably going to play like the Jags in the first round or the Texans or something like that. And I don't see them. Maybe they can win one, but then you're maybe going to Kansas City or Baltimore or something like that. Like it just doesn't seem like this team quite has a run in them. Um, but I was definitely impressed by what I saw. Obviously the Bengals are banged up, but not really on defense. So you can't discredit, they finally got 400 yards their first game without Matt Canada, which is a little
So
bit
funny.
funny.
Yeah.
But, so I think they made the right move. I think they're, obviously maximizing how good they can be, but I just don't know if it's quite enough.
Yeah, I think that's fair for sure. I think the thing I'm most interested about with them is just like Kenny Pickett, like, because it's like so clear this guy is probably not anywhere near good enough to win a Super Bowl. But it's like, what do you do? Because like he's winning you games. They're winning. They're gonna have a winning record again, most likely, unless they totally implode. Um, he's kind of got some magic in the fourth quarter a little bit. and he played pretty well today. But it's like, what do you do? Because it's just like, do you stick with him and just kind of settle on this like mediocrity and like likelihood that you're not going to win a Super Bowl, or do you like draft someone this year since the class is pretty deep and like, you know, hope you end up with someone and they play behind Pickett for a year and then maybe take over and have more competition? To me, that is what's most fascinating about Pittsburgh, because you look at this team right now, especially defensively, like TJ Watt, you've got, Cam Hayward's probably not got that many years left in the tank. Alex Highsmith's had an incredible year. Minka is there right now in his prime. You've got all these elite defensive players, and it's like at some point you got to just like go for it, because it's like, Pittsburgh always has a great defense, but it's like you've got these generational talents almost on the defensive side of the ball. It's like the offense just hasn't lived up to the standard, and I don't know what you go do about that. I think they're in a pretty good cap space next year. Maybe they can sign some guys. I'm not 100% sure. Maybe that was this past offseason. I feel like they had some sort of cap opening up. Maybe I'm wrong, though. But it's just like, what do they do at the quarterback position? Because like you said, like, I don't think they're good enough to win make a run. Maybe they can win a game in the playoffs, but like, can they make a run? Probably not. And it's like with Kenny Pickett at quarterback, like, will they ever be able to make a run? And it's like, I truly don't know, because you see the good moments, but there's also just a lot of kind of like, okay, this guy, he is what he is. So it's very interesting. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, about what they, because I feel like they're probably wouldn't take a quarterback, but it's like, I just don't, I think Pickett's better than Mac Jones, but it's kind of the same situation where it's just like, okay, you drafted this guy and it's like, draft him in the first round, and it just kind of feels like, he's not going to be good enough to win a Super Bowl. So I don't know your thoughts.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I mean, the way I saw that draft pick was they kind of gave themselves a 5-year, you know, 5-year run to figure it out. And I think we've kind of already figured it out. And I don't know, because I think Pickett under a much better offense could be better. And I do think he's like the 23rd best quarterback in the league for what it's worth. So my guess is that they don't move on, but I think you got to consider it. You gotta, try to do what's best for the team. And if you can trade him and your first round pick and some other picks and get up to, maybe whoever becomes QB3, something like that. Like,
Yeah.
I think you have to consider it, because you've got weapons. You've got, you drafted a guy on the offensive line. I think you're right about the cap space. I mean, they're not paying a quarterback, so I'd be shocked if they don't have at least some money. I mean, everything is there in place besides the quarterback and maybe 2 or 3 pieces on the line. But I feel like it's time to get that quarterback and cash your chips in, even though that wouldn't be what you would expect from the Steelers.
Yeah. It's going to be very interesting to see. Obviously, Kenny, I mean, he's got a lot of time to play things out. If he goes out and balls out in the playoffs, obviously we will eat our words as always. But it is something, I think, especially with the Steelers, that will be interesting to see kind of how that progresses over the next year or so even. Moving along, I mean, this game, Jags Texans, what a fun one. I mean, it's Trevor Lawrence, CJ Stroud, and I got to give credit to Trevor Lawrence. I've been a little down on him, or a little bit, call me a hater a little bit. He balled out. He had 364 yards passing touchdown, rushing touchdown. He played really well, I think, the week before as well, which we didn't talk about, but he had 2 rushing touchdowns last week. So seems like he's kind of, not turning the corner per se, but just like, playing up to the standard that I think we expect out of him for, how he ended last year. Ridley's getting more involved. Kirk had a good day. DJ Stroud balled out. I mean, 300 passing yards, two in the air, 1 rushing with almost 50 rushing yards. He had a really good game. Tank Dell is such a star. I mean, this game I was so excited for this one. I think it lived up to the hype. Your thoughts on kind of both these teams? Obviously, a huge win for Jacksonville. I think they've really established themselves as one of the top teams in the AFC.
Yeah, no, I think this was like what we've been waiting for from Trevor Lawrence and this Jags offense. Like, he's done enough to win most of their games this year, but it hasn't felt pretty or like it's easy or this offense is dominant in any way, really. But, against a weaker Texans defense, they were able to throw the ball all over the yard, get multiple guys involved. Ingram had a decent day, but then the focus was really the receivers of Zay Jones, and then Calvin Ridley and Kirk, who really, I think they both had like 80 something yards, which is
Yeah.
good to see from your top two receivers, obviously. And from the Texans perspective, it's like you still like the outlook is still pretty positive for them. They're still in contention for a wild card spot. They still have a outside chance at coming back and winning this division, although I think that's like pretty unlikely, but again, anything could happen. And they have one of the best quarterbacks in the league, it seems like, on a rookie contract for the next 3 years, which is ridiculous to think about. But it just the time is now. Like, you wonder how aggressive they're going to get in this offseason, just because like they have money, like outside of the first round pick this year, they're going to have most of their picks going forward. So I wonder how aggressive that this timeline gets to try to see if you can, get a couple free agent playmakers and shore up this defense or something like that. And they're playing hard for D'Amico. I think he's a really good coach. I think they've found something with their offensive coordinator. So I'm really positive on the Texans still, and big win for the Jags though.
Yeah, huge win for the Jags. Trevor balled out. The receivers, we talked about them all year. Like, with these weapons, like, this is the type of performance we expect. Maybe not as good as this one, but like week in, week out, pretty close to this level from Trevor Lawrence. And he delivered in one of their biggest games, if not their most important year to date. For Houston, man, I don't want to say this. I feel like, the term, I don't want to get too big on CJ Stroud, but I was watching this guy in this game today, and I just was like, he just reminds me of Patrick Mahomes a little
Yep.
bit. Like, just the ability to kind of create a play when it's not there, escape the pocket, find someone open. Like, you kind of just see these flashes from him where it's like, okay, like, there's some Patrick Mahomes in there, and it's like crazy to say, but will he be as good as Mahomes? I don't think so. I think that's pretty hard, but he is an elite quarterback. I mean, and this receiver room, I mean, Tank Dell is a stud. Like, this guy is balling out week in and week out. Nico Collins has broken out this year. Like, this is a really good, team for the future, like you said. And you got to expect, they're going to be aggressive in the offseason. I think, if I'm a free agent, like, you got to look to, this team and be like, I want to play there. D'Amico Ryan seems like, from his time in San Francisco to now, like, his players really ride for him. Houston, Texas, low state income tax. Like, there's a lot to, be positive about this Texans team, their future. Um, you know, I think the O line needs to get improved over time. Hopefully they kind of develop some guys there, maybe draft some guys there. But there's a lot of good about this team. Like you said, still in the playoff hunt. They still got to play the Titans twice. They play the Colts. They've got the Jets, I think, on the schedule. So, like, there's a lot of winnable games there. There's a path to the playoffs. And yeah, man, this was must watch TV, and it's going to be for the next, you know, 10 plus years with Trevor and CJ Stroud in this division. So it's awesome to see. Um, Man, yeah, CJ Stroud, like, he's getting talked about so much, and it's like you expect this guy to kind of go and start disappointing, not disappointing, but like not living up to the hype that feels like it gets leveled up each week, and it's just like he just doesn't. And obviously they didn't get the win today, but I mean they were right there. They field goal off the post from tying that up and potentially sending it to OT. So great game. But man, Trevor Lawrence also, like, hell of a game from him. And if he can continue playing like that, this Jags offense is, not one to be messed around with. That's for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, do you want to move on to the game of the week? Or
Yeah, let's do it.
yeah, so another absolutely insane game for the Eagles. It feels like every week, I said this before we started filming to Griffin, I was like, man, it just feels like we like try to make it as interesting as we possibly can every week. Like, this week it's you can't move the ball in the first half. You're turning the ball over left and right. And then you start to move the ball all of a sudden, and you find yourself, almost trying to get yourself out of field goal range at the end of regulation. And then, in the rain, in the wind, Jake Elliott makes a near 60-yard field goal. I mean, this guy is truly a weapon. Like he just seems to never miss any clutch kicks, which I'm sure I'm jinxing him now. He's gonna miss the chip
Miss
shot
one for
next
the
week to
Super
win it.
Bowl.
Yeah. So yeah, he's been really good. And then in overtime, able to hold the Bills to a field goal. Obviously, the miscommunication with Gabe Davis and Allen, you just I thought the game was over, to be honest. I was like, all right, we played our hardest, but we lost. And then, you see the ball falls incomplete and you're like, wow, we have a chance. And so many emotions through this game, and there's something to be said. My question is, we can talk about the Bills in a second, but would you consider this to be like, this is great for the Eagles, as in they're winning games, and they're figuring it out? It's not necessarily pretty, but they're getting better and better every week, and they're fighting, and there's no quit in this team? Or could you look at it like, this is kind of like the Vikings from last year, where it's like they're able to win all these close games and put up a really good record, but are they actually one of these really, really good teams? And I think the fact that this team made the Super Bowl last year leans me in the direction that they are a really good team, and it's just been a dogfight with a really tough schedule this year. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with what you said. Like, I was just looking at their schedule. Like, their last three games have been the Cowboys, the Chiefs, and the Bills. Like, those are three of the premier teams in the NFL. Buffalo this week. I mean, since what's his name, the old offensive coordinator. What was it? Was
And
it
Dorsey.
Ken Dorsey? Yeah, that's what I thought. Since he's been fired, the last two games, like Josh Allen has balled out. This offense has been firing on all cylinders. Josh Allen still gets the interception, of course, 8 games in a row now, which is pretty crazy. But he played just insane, and so did Jalen Hurts. I mean, obviously Hurts had the 2 turnovers, but 5 total touchdowns. This Eagles team is really good. I mean, we've seen it. Obviously, you know, they're not blowing teams out. They've only had, I just looked, 3 games this year. This got decided by more than one score. So they've been in a lot of tight games. But they're really good, and they're, I think it's different from the Vikings last year, and just I feel like the Eagles are just like, it's like, I don't want to say last year was like, some of those Vikings wins were a little fluky, but like this Eagles team, I just think is just way better all around. Like they've got a much better defense. The weapons on offense are, obviously the Vikings did have pretty good weapons on offense last year, but Jalen is just such a threat with the legs. This was a great game. I mean, I was, like you said, like that field goal from Elliott, like in the conditions, I cannot believe that went in. And then, Buffalo gets the ball, and, I think Josh Allen is now 0-6 in overtime or something like that, which is nuts. That guy is just, they changed the rules for him in, the playoff format, and he gets the ball first. It just doesn't matter. The guy's not going to win. So maybe against Buffalo, it's just like you just need to try to hit OT, because then it's like a guaranteed win. So, but, I think say a loss is encouraging when you're especially 6-6 now, 10th in the AFC, but this was encouraging, I think, from Buffalo. These last 2 weeks have been, obviously, they were in a bit of a rough streak, and just seeing this offense erupt for 30 plus points back-to-back weeks, and seeing the way Josh Allen has been playing, and at the level that we expect out of Josh Allen, I think is super encouraging. And I think Buffalo, they do have a tough rest of schedule: Chiefs, Cowboys, Chargers, Pats, Dolphins. So they got it out for them. But the way their offense is playing right now, this team can beat any team in the NFL. So great game, like you said. And I think for Philly, just another one of those signature wins that, this team is cruising to the number one seed once again, and no reason to think that it's going to slow down. Although I do think, next week is a big game. I think, especially it's both of these teams are pretty much relatively healthy. Obviously, Lane Johnson, who knows what his status will be next week. Fletcher Cox, I don't believe, returned to the game today. Did he? No. So, again, another guy to, status to monitor. But, the Niners got some, good players hurt. Their safety, obviously, I'm not even going to try to botch his last name. But relatively, I think, speaking, both teams should have a quarterback. I should just end it at that this time. Whereas last time, unfortunately, we did not get to see that. So, I'll leave it at that. Any other thoughts, or do you want to jump to we can talk about the Browns Broncos? I mean, that's both teams are threatening there.
Yeah, no, just really quickly, like you said, like, um, yeah, I mean, this is going to be a huge game next week against the Niners just because it feels like the Eagles can all but lock up the 1 seed if they win. Being 11-1, whereas every other team would either have 3 or 4 losses, and the Eagles would be, have the tiebreaker, I believe, over all those teams. It just feels like it would be hard for them to lose the division, especially when their last 3 games are Giants, Cardinals, Giants. Um, so it does feel like another huge game. But yeah, let's get into Browns Broncos. The Broncos are so back somehow. I mean, it's not pretty, but they're able to run the ball, and I got to give some credit to Russell Wilson, man. Like, I don't think he's necessarily very good, but I also think he's making the plays he needs to, and most importantly, keeping the ball out of harm's way, which is, it's kind of a boring way to play football, but it also can be really effective. And the Broncos are showing that they don't, they're not really elite at anything, but they're solid everywhere. It feels like they've gotten rid of most of the weak links on their defense,
Yeah.
and it looked like a really brutally bad defense to start the year, and now it's like, an average to solid defense. And this, yeah, like I said, with the offense, they're not elite at anything, but they move the ball, they don't turn it over too much, they've got a decent line, and Sean Payton's a pretty good coach, pretty good play caller. So they're probably not going to end up making the playoffs, but it doesn't matter. They needed to turn their season around and show some semblance of life. Like, I don't even know. Like, we talked about it a little bit. It's like, what do you even do with the Russell Wilson contract? Like, you can't even try to get out of that, I don't think. But so yeah, now it feels like you can at least go into next year and be like, we have something to hang our hats on. As for the Browns, this is a pretty disappointing loss. Like, this defense, we saw Myles Garrett get hurt. We don't really know what the deal is with that, but that's not good. Um, whatever that is, he's probably their most valuable player. I mean, definitely is
Yeah.
their most valuable player now that I think about it. Like, without a quarterback, it doesn't really feel like anyone on the offense is that much of a difference maker. And Myles Garrett's definitely the big man on defense. So, you know, that hurts. Every game is really important in this super competitive AFC. I almost just said ACC, which is crazy. Um, but I think they have a bit of a lighter schedule coming up, so I wouldn't say it's all necessarily doom and gloom for the Browns. But like I said, any game you lose in this AFC is not you're not going to be happy about it.
Yeah, I think you put it well. I mean, the Browns are definitely banged up. You had Denzel Ward out going into the game. Myles Garrett left, I think, with a sling on his arm. Mari Cooper exited the game. DTR is concussed. So it's not good. It's not good in Cleveland right now whatsoever. You got to wonder, PJ Walker played all right, but you got to wonder, do they give Joe Flacco
Joe
kind of the look
Flacco.
to run the shop? And I really don't know what 38-year-old Joe Flacco is going to give you, but I may as well give it a shot. But like you said, like I just looked at their schedule. They got the Jets. They've got I guess that could be if somehow Aaron Rodgers decides to come back with the lost season, could be the Aaron Rodgers Jets. But I don't even think with that O line and receiving
Yeah.
core, it's even going to matter. But alas, maybe then. But you have the Bengals there too. You got the Rams next week. I think the Bears still on there. So like you said, pretty light. So they can probably find 3 wins in there with how good that defense is. But if like Garrett's out for a long time and like Ward doesn't come back and Amari's out, then it's like okay, then they're just screwed. Um, Flip side, Denver it's such an interesting team because Russell Wilson somehow ends up with like 150 passing yards only every game, but it's like you watch the game and you're like, he played pretty well. Like I feel
Yeah.
like I was watching the game, I was like, damn, like Russ is kind of cooking. And it's like I look at the stat sheet, I'm like 134 yards, like what the hell? He had some really good scrambles in this one too, using his legs, which kind of what he was signature for back in his days in Seattle. Which obviously he's older now, and we just haven't really seen much in Denver. But this team's won 5 games in a row. The defense has taken like the complete 180 from getting 70 piece by the Dolphins, which is just nuts that we're here now talking about this team 6-5 after that. But yeah, they've been running the ball. Javante looks to be more like himself. P. Ryan even had a great game. Cortland Sutton has made some crazy catches this year, and yeah, I think they've just bought in, and I think we're starting to see Sean Payton, the value that he brings, and just how good a coach he is. Because turning it around from 1-5 and winning 5 in a row is pretty remarkable. So hats off to him. He's done a great job, and Russell Wilson. I mean, I was just looking at the stats. Like his QB rating right now is at 120 or 103, 20 touchdowns to 4 picks this year. Like that's pretty darn good. Like Russ is he's been balling out. So credit to him. And credit to the Broncos defense, man. I think it's Vance Joseph in charge of that unit nowadays. I might be
Yeah.
wrong. But turning that around to becoming like a pretty good defense almost is pretty remarkable. I mean, remarkable. I mean, they've beat the Bills, Chiefs, and the Vikings. The Josh Dobbs Vikings aren't an easy win. So like they've beaten some really good teams in the last few weeks. So credit to them. Definitely a fun one. Not a fun one, but definitely a cool story, I guess. I don't know. Denver's, good for them, I guess is where I should put it.
Yeah.
I mean, looking at, I guess real quick, the Chiefs, I think it's, they got off to a rough start, then they outscore Vegas 31-3 to end the game. Mahomes really comfortable, 298 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, which I think was so key for this offense. This offense, it just felt dead, in the last few weeks, especially in the second half. So I think it was really encouraging to see them play well. Rashid Rice had a huge game, over 100 yards receiving. Kelsey was great. Pacheco, 2 touchdowns. After that game in Philly where it was a little sloppy, the Dolphins game before, the Broncos game the week before, where are you at right now with the Chiefs? Do you think this team is still the team to beat in the AFC? Has their offense, are you still concerned? Kind of what are your updated thoughts after this week and obviously a strong performance from Mahomes?
Yeah, I think they're still the favorite out of the AFC, but I'll be honest, I'm really excited for this Bills Chiefs game next week. Like must win for the Bills to really
Is that
stay
next
in.
week?
It is next
Yeah.
week. I'm pretty sure.
No, it's the week after.
Week after.
Yeah.
Um.
Bills
Oh yeah,
play.
Bills are on bye. Yeah.
Are they on bye? Yeah, they are on bye. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the next game they play. So that'll be interesting. But I just think that'll be a good, kind of measuring stick for the Chiefs again. But I think, between Rashee Rice and Kelsey and, Sky Moore, I guess, getting back involved, like I guess they're gonna figure it out. Like they're just, you got Mahomes. Like I think the best way to put it, he's just kind of thugging it out back there. Like he's like, he doesn't have the best situation around him with the playmakers, but he's gonna find a guy and make a good throw if they're open. He's still got Kelsey, he's still got the legs, still got a good line, still got a great defense. So I'm still confident in this Chiefs team, but it's still a little scary to go into the playoffs with no quality starters at the wide receiver position. So it's not all sunshine and roses after a slow start and beating the Raiders. That's nothing to really write home about necessarily, although they've certainly increased their level of play. But just yeah, I would still pick them out of the AFC. That's what I'm thinking still. What about you?
It's really interesting. I'm trying to think. I mean, I guess the Ravens you got to have up there, but like I feel like we've just seen the same old story with the Ravens these last few years. This year is so interesting because it's like the Bengals have been like that team the last few years, and obviously now with Burrow out, it's not the same. The Bills could miss the playoffs, which they've been the other kind of not kryptonite, but other like tough battle. It feels like for the Chiefs come playoff time. So it's like you got the Ravens that are more up there this year. But other than like I guess the Jags, but like I'd probably still pick the Chiefs over the Jags. The AFC as much hype as I feel like it got before the year. Obviously, injuries have happened, which have hurt teams like the Jets, the Browns, the Bengals. But it really doesn't feel like the top is really that elite compared to I think we could be seeing an NFC Super Bowl champion this year, whether it is Philly, whether it's San Francisco, whether Dallas somehow comes out of the NFC. I mean, they obviously haven't won the big game yet this year, but like they've been playing really good and blowing out, the weaker teams. Those three teams, just because they've got great defenses and their offenses can be so explosive. I would say right now I'm leaning towards an NFC Super Bowl champion. But yeah, I think I'd probably guess I'd still say the Chiefs at the top of the AFC just because they've done it before. We've seen it. And, I think today was really encouraging though, because, it was dark for the last few games, especially in the second half. So seeing, them put together the offense a little more, seeing Pacheco have a few touchdowns, I think is definitely encouraging for sure. But it'll be very interesting. The AFC is more interesting in a different way than I guess we thought going in, but it's still, it's going to be come playoff time, very interesting to see what happens.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anything else you want to touch on, or, I think we kind of hit most of the big games for this week.
Yeah, no, I think we hit on mostly everything. Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess that will do it for this week's episode of Outside the Arena then. Different format this week, but I like it. I like talking about the games after the fact. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. Follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify there at Outside the Arena. Our social medias will all be linked down in the description below. And yeah, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see y'all next week on Outside the Arena.